This is the AL71 from Yunzii, a gasket-mounted wireless keyboard with a CNC Aluminium case which costs just $84.99 as a bare bone and $99.99 fully assembled. A very good price on paper, but the price means very little till we check out the typing experience, build quality, and features, which I'll run through in this video. Before we dig into that, see my Linktree link in the description below where you'll find an extensive list of keyboard affiliate links and discount codes, which includes a link for the Yunzii website. Alternatively, you can just use discount code keebface at checkout on yunzii.com. On to unboxing, and there were a couple of nice little surprises. Generally speaking, a standard unboxing, but in addition to the keyboard, manual, switch and keycap puller and cable, I was surprised to see the rest of the base kit keycaps and a couple of spare switches. Straight out of the box, I was taken back by the quality of the keyboard, with the exception of the coating on the case. It's an extremely matte and powdery feeling anodized job compared to other keyboards, and feels much more prone to marking and scratching, but more on that later. In terms of the aesthetic, I really like the case colour on this red version, and the keycaps look great on it. It's a pretty basic case design with no external weight, which you'd expect at this price point to keep machining costs down. It's a nice looking CNC job though, with nice clean beveled edges, and this section machined out of the sides on the bottom case to add a little bit of something different to the side profile. I could definitely live without the badge, which doesn't add much for me, and I really prefer no visible switches or 2.4 GHz dongle storage, but other than that, it looks pretty good. Before deciding what I want to do, we need to hear the stock typing test. This is the stock sound test on the red version, with factory lubed crystal white linear switches and factory lubed plate mount stabilizers. It has a flex cut polycarbonate plate, a flex cut 1.2mm PCB, pour on case and plate dampening, and an IXPE switch mat. That's an extremely strong typing test for a fully assembled CNC Aluminium keyboard at the $100 price point. The stock build is really good, the typing sound and feel is really nice with the exception of some minor rattle on one or two stabilizers, which is an easy fix with a syringe. The factory lube job on the switches are fine for me, with no spring ping and a nice smooth feel. You can really feel the short travel on the switches though, which I'm not particularly into, even though I usually have no problem with speed switches. There's plenty of flex and gasket movement, it's got a lovely poppy sound, and notably there is no case resonance that I'm hearing, which is common on budget aluminium keyboards requiring the force break mod to fix. I'm really impressed, and the only thing I want to do on this one is to remove the IXPE switch mat, as they do tend to alter the sound profile quite drastically, and I prefer the cleaner sound profile you get without it. Disassembly isn't bad on this one. I'm removing the switch sheet, so I need to do a full disassembly, but this isn't necessary unless you're changing something in the plate and PCB assembly. First I remove the keycaps, which you don't need to do if you're just opening the case, then I remove the switches, which you also don't need to do if you're just opening the case. I also remove the stabilizers, but this was just to have a look, as you don't need to remove these even for disassembly of the plate and PCB. With those out, you just flip over the keyboard and remove the 6 hex head case screws. There is a QC sticker over one of the screw holes, and you probably can't return it once you've removed this. I mentioned before that the anodized job didn't feel great on this keyboard, but I will say I removed the sticker and rubbed away the residue without damaging the paint, which is a good sign. Next, you flip it back over and lift off the top case, remove the plastic LED diffuser from the plate, then you can tilt up the plate and PCB for disconnecting the battery and daughterboard wires. There are 3 wires to disconnect, and this isn't the easiest job as the wires are too short, preventing you from flipping up the plate and PCB enough to work. 2 of the connectors are hindered by the nearest hot swap sockets, which is also not ideal. With the plate and PCB out, we can disassemble it. There are Phillips head screws to remove from the underside of the PCB, after which you can separate the plate, the PCB and the dampening. And that's the keyboard stripped down into its component parts. In terms of quality, this all looks really good for the price point. I won't show reassembly as it's just the same as taking it apart just in reverse order, but I'll run through some of the more significant things I noted during disassembly, on inspection once apart, and during reassembly. The case is very nice quality inside and out. There is a plastic sheet in the bottom to isolate the case from the PCB I guess, and the battery, daughter board and 2.4 GHz dongle are all nicely countersunk into the bottom of the case in very nicely machined recesses, without leaving any huge gaps which would affect the sound. The PCB is 1.2mm thick and is cut to give that flex in addition to the gasket system, but this will likely mean you'll need to run at least a plate foam or risk it sounding too thin, although this is obviously preference. It's also worth noting that the PCB does not support screw-in stabilizers. It's not a deal breaker as the plate mount stabilizers are fine, but it's worth considering as similar keyboards like the Monzgeek M series are screw-in stabilizer compatible. The gaskets are on the polycarbonate plate, which is also flex cut, and I must say the gasket material is a little weird. It's similar to memory foam, so slowly recovers after being compressed. This shouldn't have too much of an effect really, but if you were typing hard and fast, I guess you could potentially compress them while typing, though I don't think you'd ever notice this. The factory lube job on the stabilizers is pretty good. We've got some lube on the stem which is nice and not that common, and the wires are lubed around the clips and into the stem as you'd expect. I'm not going to do anything with these until back together, as only syringe lubing is necessary. The factory lube job in the switches is also fine. The rails on the stems have got a nice coat, as do the ends of the springs. While I do lube all the outer surfaces on a linear switch stem when hand lubing, this is good enough that I wouldn't bother taking the time to hand lube. Finally, disassembly and reassembly is pretty easy, but the wires are definitely too short. Those hot swap sockets make disconnecting a pain, and the gasket doesn't seat and locate itself in the bottom case very intuitively. You kind of have to jiggle it around a bit to get the top case to land off without needing to use force to close the case. Make sure you line this up while putting the top case on, because if you just screw it down you'll likely pinch something. All in all, I'm happy with the strip down and rebuild, and I'm really impressed with the quality of everything for the price. Now let's hear how it sounds without the IXPE switch mat, and I still haven't syringe lubed the stabs as they are still sounding pretty good. For me, that's a much nicer sound profile without forcing the lower tone with the IXPE switch mat, but of course this is a preference thing and you should just run with whatever you think sounds best. It comes with all the foams you need as it should, so you can just run all of it, or the combination that you want. If you like the lower tone, or I guess the thocky or more creamy sound profile, I would run the IXPE switch mat and look for a deeper sounding set of switches, as the crystal clear linears have a higher or more clacky tone. My final thoughts on the keyboard are very good. My main focus will always be on the build quality, aesthetic and typing experience, which are all nice on this budget keyboard, but it also has some nice features for the price. The full RGB with the RGB sidebars looks really nice, the perky RGB is nicely diffused through the polycarbonate plate, and the sidebars look awesome too. With Tri-Mode Connect you have wired 2.4 GHz wireless and Bluetooth connectivity to up to 3 devices, which I know is important for those who want a wireless desk setup. One thing I will say is that having used and tested 3 of the Monzgeek M series keyboards, at a glance this looks like it could be the 65% version from that lineup, and it really is pretty close now that the Monzgeek M7W is on the market. The cutouts in the sides of the case for the accents, or in this case the RGB bar, is strikingly similar to the Monzgeek keyboards. That said, the keyboard is very different in terms of the typing sound and feel, and with the price and quality it certainly does carve out its own spot in the budget aluminium arena. I really like it. And that's it. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.